Welcome to Mineral Minute. My name is Brock Werner, Extension Educator for the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. In today's segment, we'll be discussing selenium supplementation and how we can connect soil and forage selenium to what we need to supply to these cattle. Our discussion of selenium supplementation should really start with the selenium content in soils and forages in the state. The form of selenium that is uptaken from forages to the cow is really well available to the animal, and thus the forage selenium concentration is a good indicator of the selenium status of our cattle if no supplementation is provided. When we look at this map across the state, the blue counties, the darker they are, represent higher soil selenium concentrations. And from this, we can tell that there are several large areas of lighter color in the central portion of the state that have selenium deficient soils, whereas along the eastern border and several counties along the South Dakota border have relatively high concentrations of selenium that may cause some toxicity. Forage selenium generally follows soil selenium concentrations, and we know that there are some species that accumulate selenium at relatively high concentrations. Some examples would be loco weed and some milk vetches that uptake a lot of selenium from the soil and therefore pose a potential risk for our cattle when they consume them. When cattle consumes diets containing greater than 5 parts per million of selenium, there's potential for developing chronic toxicity. And when these diets are consumed over extended periods of time, we might start seeing some signs of selenium toxicity in our cow herds. So based on this map, we can see that there's a lot of variation in our forage selenium concentrations, and this can even be on a pasture by pasture basis. So in the case of selenium, it's really important that we test our pastures and forages for selenium so we can more accurately guide our supplementation strategy. Of the trace minerals, selenium is one of the most common ones where deficiency and toxicity is observed. Deficiency can present as white muscle disease, which is nutritional muscular dystrophies or degeneration of the muscle, which is portrayed by the photo on the right. The right-hand side would be affected by selenium deficiency and is clearly a lot whiter colored. So if we have a necropsy performed on a selenium deficient animal, these striated muscles such as large muscle groups, heart, and other muscle groups would have this white coloration that would be abnormal compared to the muscle on the left-hand side. Deficiency can also cause weak calves caused by this muscular dystrophy, retained placentas in the females, poor reproductive outcomes, and suppressed immune function. These poor reproductive outcomes are largely driven by retained placentas. With this additional time taken to remodel the reproductive tract when the placenta is retained, decreases the risk that these cows are able to be bred first or second service, therefore less likely to remain in the cow herd. Acute toxicity, which is can be described as really severe toxicity, is also called blind staggers or alkali disease, and is noted by unsteady gait and blindness, and in some cases death. Chronic toxicity, on the other hand, is when diets moderately high in selenium are consumed over an extended duration of time, in which cases lameness, unthriftiness, and hair loss on the tail switch may be observed. Now that we've discussed the potential hazards of over or under supplementing selenium to our cows, it begs the question, how much selenium do my cows actually need? The cow requirement for selenium is 0.1 part per million, and since there's such a risk of developing toxicity if selenium is overfed, the FDA has a maximum legal amount of selenium that can be added to the total diet, which is 0.3 parts per million. This equivalent, when supplied by a 4-ounce mineral, is 26 parts per million. When you go to the farm store and look at a feed tag, most products will be at or slightly below this 26 part per million concentration. The selenium supplied in these supplements is primarily in the form of sodium selenite or selenium yeast. Selenium yeast has been shown to have 2 times the bioavailability of sodium selenite. So therefore, if we were to supply selenium yeast, in theory, we could provide half of what we would if we were feeding sodium selenite. Any discussion of selenium would not be complete without at least mentioning vitamin E. because there's a lot of crossover between the processes that selenium and vitamin E play in the body. And since there's so much crossover between what they're involved in, it's common to provide additional selenium through our free choice mineral in order to overcome some of the effects of supplying less vitamin E. And this is primarily due to just the cheaper cost of providing selenium through our free choice mineral compared to vitamin E. As some general rules of thumb, when soil and forages are low in selenium, targeting that 26 parts per million in our 4-ounce mineral is recommended. However, on the other hand, when soil and forages are known to be high in selenium, supplementation may not even be necessary. And since there's such a narrow margin of error when feeding selenium, if the soil and forage selenium concentrations are unknown for your region, it's a good idea to contact your local veterinarian or extension specialist to have them help you work through this. So with these requirements in mind, how do we actually apply these to the cow herd? So assuming that we have our selenium program going smoothly and we're supplying selenium sufficiently, we really want to avoid over supplementing selenium because there is a risk of developing toxicity when these diets surpass 5 parts per million. And this is especially true when we give an additional selenium containing supplement because we can easily surpass selenium in circulation that is past the maximum tolerable threshold. So if we're supplementing selenium adequately, providing an injectable source is probably not a good idea in most cases. So we want to avoid stacking these selenium containing products. Additionally, if we're in an area with high selenium concentrations in the forages, we can mitigate this by blending our high selenium feedstuffs with low selenium feedstuffs to bring the total diet selenium to a more manageable level. Additionally, calves are at increased risk of developing selenium deficiency. So this deficiency in calves is not noted nearly as much when cows are supplied selenium adequately. And with this, it's been noted that selenium is really efficiently transferred through the placenta to the fetal calf. And with this, the pregnant cow is the best way to ensure that our calves are born with adequate selenium status. Once born, these calves have to rely on their own selenium reserves until they're able to consume enough free choice mineral to replete their reserves and have adequate selenium status. So with this, by adequately supplementing the whole cow herd, especially during gestation, we can mitigate any risk of developing selenium deficiency in these calves that are born.